Can you recall summer vacations during your childhood? 11 weeks. An eternity indeed. Long enough to make it seem like summer holidays and school started at two entirely different points in time. Then there is the recent year. Where did all of it go? There must have been at least several memorable events, a trip perhaps, and a couple of birthdays. All the rest, though, the ordinary Tuesdays, the boring errands, all the mundane evenings, they have blended into some gray blur. All the same number of months and weeks pass by, yet somehow it all felt differently. This is not nostalgia talking. Indeed, there seems to be something fundamentally different happening with your perception of time, which has little to do with how busy or idle you have been recently. Just ask people in their 30s or above how they spent their 20s, and they will mostly reply in the same terms. A few highlights, a marriage or relocation or a job change, but there also must have been a significant number of those ordinary months and years, which seemed impossible to distinguish one from the other in retrospect. Compare it to your recollections from school. Even a single year from your childhood can easily seem like an epoch gone by. Why does this happen? Let us look into the issue starting with the simplest explanation. In the late 19th century, William James, a great philosopher and psychologist of the age, noticed a rather obvious but nevertheless extremely profound thing. The subjective perception of time is strongly connected to our understanding of our lives in general. Imagine how a 5-year-old child would perceive a single year. For such a child, 1 year would represent 20% of all the time they lived. Of course, such a large chunk of their lifetime would be perceived as something very important and meaningful. Do the same math at 50, however. Now, 1 year represents only 2% of your lifetime. This means that from your current point of view, the exact same year looks only about 1/10 of its previous size. Let's run the numbers on a few ages and see a clear picture emerging. At age 10, 1 year equals 10% of your lifetime. At age 20, 1 year equals 5% of your lifetime. At age 40, 1 year equals 2.5% of your lifetime. At age 80, 1 year equals 1.2% of your lifetime. You could go on like this for a while. Every time you double your age, the subjective size of the next year decreases twofold. Indeed, it doesn't look as though this decrease would ever stop. Of course, it doesn't really mean that the calendar year became any less or any more significant as such. What is changing is only your perception of its size in relation to your lifetime so far. The year is the same. The Earth keeps turning around the sun as slowly or quickly as it has always been doing. Yet your perception of how large it is in proportion to everything you have lived through is steadily decreasing. Just like when you zoom out on a map to get a broader view, you can clearly see the first mile you have walked. However, on the map showing you 1,000 miles of the journey, the very same mile is nothing more than a tiny dot. It explains some part of the problem. Yet there is also something that this approach fails to address: the disparity between the way in which we experience time as such in the moment and the way in which we remember that very period in retrospect. This particular phenomenon was addressed by Claudia Hammond, a well-known British psychologist and radio presenter. She dubbed this problem holiday paradox and spent her entire career trying to unravel it. Here's the gist of it. Imagine yourself on the third day of your week-long trip somewhere. You are having quite a lot of time there as it seems, and the days seem to be endless. There is just too much you can do and see in a relatively small time. However, in a couple of weeks after returning home, this 7-day period would seem like a blink of an eye. It is compressed into what can only be called blurry highlights. In the moment, the period felt long. In retrospect, short. Why does it happen? According to Claudia Hammond, the key factor here is novelty. Your brain does not register time per se. It simply encodes experiences you have had, just like a video camera would record your life, storing a number of separate snapshots into your memory. An unusual event, such as traveling to a new place and experiencing new sights and foods and routes and whatever, gets registered. A lot of different memories about it appear in your mind, one following another. Once your brain tries to gauge how much time was involved, it compares the number of memories about that particular period to its length. The higher the number of stored memories, the longer you will consider that very period to be. Thus, the key to this paradox lies in the fact that we remember experiences and not seconds as such. The number of different experiences per minute is what matters, not the mere passing of time. Try for yourself. How did you perceive your first month after moving to a new city, or your first days in a new job, or the early stage of your relationship? Chances are they seem to drag on endlessly. This is due to the simple fact that almost everything about that very period was new and required your attention. A new city you needed to explore, a new set of people who made new rules and had new expectations, a totally new environment you had to master and adapt to. After a year had gone by, though, the majority of those things have become habitual and uninteresting for your brain. You no longer pay attention to them, so the memories cease to be formed, effectively shortening your experience. How does all of that look from the vantage point of our childhood? A child constantly sees new and unusual things, so every minute he spends on learning new things leaves a mark in his memory. The first days at school, the first ride on a bicycle, first best friends, first job, first girlfriend, and first apartment. Countless new things which are all carefully memorized by an eager mind. Yet as we age, our brain stops registering those everyday things. You no longer see a new city when you leave for work, nor are you surprised to buy milk at your local store, and you do not bother paying attention to the same people you see every single day. Instead of countless memorable moments in a row, your adult years only have several highlights which are remembered well and which dominate your recollections. The same year is long as the one from your childhood was, just much less filmed by your brain. But there is also a third aspect to all this, a truly fascinating and bizarre one which lies deeper than all the others. In 2019, Adrian Bejan suggested an intriguing hypothesis explaining how and why time seems to fly by when we age. According to his theory, there is something profoundly physiological behind the accelerating subjective perception of time with aging. In particular, he focuses on what he calls mental processing speed, the speed at which a brain registers mental frames of experience within 1 second of real time. A baby has numerous small neurons firing rapidly. Therefore, the brain receives many distinct frames of experience in a single second. However, as we age, the neural pathways connecting various parts of the brain get longer. In addition, changes in our physiology affect our cardiovascular system, so the blood flow becomes slower and the signals propagate much less effectively. As a result, the brain gets less information within 1 second. It sees less frames. The subjective perception of time is thus inevitably reduced. Here's the connection. If the brain operates in a more sluggish manner, then the number of mental frames received from the environment in 1 second of real time also reduces. The brain registers less details and information in that second. Therefore, subjectively, it takes shorter. The same amount of real time is reduced in the subjective perception to several frames, hence the feeling that everything happens quicker. In one series of studies, for example, the researcher Peter Mangan examined how people from various age groups assessed the duration of a certain period of time. The participants had to say how many minutes elapsed after they started the timer in their mind. As the experiments showed, younger people made more accurate estimates than older people. This meant that the older subjects perceived this period of time to be longer than it really was. They needed more seconds to fill the span of time which they subjectively perceived to be as long as 3 minutes. Thus, from this point of view, aging entails slowing down of the cognitive system, and hence slowing down of the subjective perception of time. Again, as in the case with novel experiences, you perceive less information. Therefore, all of these phenomena interact together in an interesting combination, leading to a certain effect. 1 year of your life seems smaller in relation to the whole life. The novel memories of that year make it even smaller. And finally, aging makes your mind process information faster. What is important, none of these effects is related to the actual passing of time, but rather to the specifics of your biological mechanisms. From the evolutionary standpoint, this seems rather natural, however. Novel stimuli were what used to be important for our ancestors. They were what made a difference between life and death in an unfriendly environment. There was no need to encode a dozen repetitions of the familiar environment. The very same principle guides your mind today. You have probably stopped encoding memories of your everyday routine by this point. All of these processes have been taking place inside your brain without your participation and knowledge. All you can do is merely be aware of them and try to use them to your advantage. If you understand that novel experiences are crucial in creating your memories and that they form a subjective basis of your perception of time, then it becomes apparent that all it takes is some creativity and imagination. Create new landmarks in an otherwise familiar environment. Make conversations with people you do not usually communicate with. Go somewhere that is not your usual destination, or change your route to work. None of these requires much effort, yet such minor changes can create unforgettable memories that you will look back upon decades later. You will not be able to change the actual rate of time passing by doing that, yet you may still be able to preserve some memories of it for posterity. So, next time when you suddenly realize how fast that year was, understand one thing. This is not your fault. Your brain is simply operating in accordance with its own laws.